the metaphor that I'm using to try to direct our attention to a particular aspect of consciousness is the butter knife. Is a knife that is used more often back in the last century. A knife that doesn't really have much of a blade to it, called a butter knife. You can't cut much. You're lucky to cut butter. And then versus the razor's edge. And of course, we're using those metaphors to, and as the way consciousness works. If you're using a butter knife, you're not going to be able to cut very well, very cleanly, and very clearly and sharply. Again, these are images and metaphors that work a little bit. And so I would use and add another one. I would say the butter knife, the razor, and then going from there to the sword of prajna, or the double-edged sword, the sword that cuts through this and that. It cuts through this and that. So it cuts through our apprehension, our attachment to, and our belief in duality. Two things. Thinking there's more than this. So using that image, the way I would say, the way I'm going to say now is that we, in our hurry, in our anxiousness, in our desire to go out and do this or do that, or collect this or collect that, or push this down and control this or that, based on our preconceptions, our opinions, our ideas, and our beliefs, is more like trying to do things with a dull blade, a butter knife. It's not that you can't cut things, you can. And since you don't know what it's like to see clearly, to cut clearly, you may think this is good enough, and you just put more force behind it, or you put more energy. Again, it's a metaphor and may work well. Hopefully, it'll give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm referring to. So whereas the razor, or the razor's edge, or the sharp blade is something where the idea there is to encourage us to train the mind to sharpen this blade of awareness, sit down and sharpen the awareness before we get up and go into what we call post-meditation, or after the awareness practice, to go into our everyday life, where it's like, sometimes wading through scrambled eggs. It can be very confusing. And especially confusing if you have this butter knife kind of quality happening, where you're trying to see clearly, but we kind of give in, and what we do is we end up going to our concepts about things, or we go to judgment about it based on not being able to see so clearly. So the basic, as I said, the metaphor is imperfect. When you try to extend it out a little bit, it doesn't pick up other attendant metaphors to help us go further, maybe a little bit. But I think the important thing is to think of the awareness as like a blade that cuts through this and that. It goes into the situation deeply and actually leaves the conceptual grasping and attachment and belief and opinions behind. It doesn't get rid of them necessarily. It just puts them in a different perspective and puts them, as I sometimes say, at the back of the bus or in the back seat, or those concepts aren't necessarily driving us. When concepts are driving us around, even if they're really wonderful concepts about we're all one, or everything, everyone should, there should be equality, or there should be this or that. When those are clouded, or when those are unclear, or those have not been cut into with a sharp blade of awareness, we tend to pick sides. We tend to have things show up. We tend to settle for ideas that will help support us, so that we don't have to look at how unclear we are, unsharp we are. One of them is nationalism, patriotism. Any kind of religious attachment can be doing that, including Buddhism. It can happen here in our particular approach. So again, it's a way of talking about it. That's why this is difficult to discuss, teach, talk about. It's difficult to teach even if you have some if you have spent some time and you really are beginning to have an understanding of how this works, to try to bring that into words, to go back into the concepts that you've been starting to live out in front of. It's difficult. I feel that this is why some of the teachers in ancient times would teach through example, through just various odds and ends, ways of kind of encouraging one's consciousness to fall out or leap out in front of the conceptual grasping, the conceptual framework into a clear understanding of what this is. The teacher, the scholar monk Vasubandhu was very good in his all his writing, but his 30 verses was a very good way to say in a conceptual way that unless until the awareness of the consciousness of that leading edge, if it's in fact leading, is if it is not situated, if it is not resting in this moment, which we call perception only, but is resting in some kind of other structure or concept or belief, even if it's relatively true. That's why it's so difficult. Even if you could have relative, you could take it to court and say, well, should be happening this way. The concept would be unless and until awareness is resting in or situated in perception only. The twofold grasping will not cease to operate. So the twofold grasping is belief in an other and belief in a self who is perceiving, viewing, or manipulating, or likes or doesn't like, or ignores the other. It's very simple and it's conceptual, but as soon as you hear that, then you actually have to start practicing it. Then you have to, if you want to go deeply into it. So this is what the blade is about. Sharpen the blade. You are not going to be able to think your way into this. And he even mentions in there, in one of the verses, I can't remember which number it was, and I can't even quote it, but he basically says if you just think about this and you think you've got it because you understand it intellectually, that's still not it. So I would like to say it this way: until you don't know what you're doing. As long as you know what you're doing, if you I know what I'm doing, I understand this. This is incorrect. This is what he's referring to. If you think you understand this, you don't, because you're still operating in the milieu of concepts. It's when you actually start, your consciousness actually starts to show up in perception only and consciousness only, and that has no, there's no credentials there. This Buddha Dharma, awakened truth without credentials. You're actually living in a dimension or a realm that doesn't really have a past and a future. We're not saying there isn't a quality of pastness or futureness. Of course there is. But where you are is for always here. Should I yell that? I could. I would if I thought it would encourage you. But we're always here. It's never yesterday. It's never tomorrow. Those are two of the things that are connected with the physicality of things that arise and decay. So it's not that that isn't happening, but it's quite a secondary, if not tertiary, consideration. Chetan.
Can practice ever be more than a relative approach?
We have to start with it being relative. So we start out, we're suffering, we want to know what to do, so we stumble into the teachings, we see that what's happening, we see that we might need to become a student, find someone who seems to understand, and so there's a very relative kind of situation. It's called the provisional teachings. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 Links, and so on, the 6 realms, the 3 realms, all the other various kinds of conceptual constructs that help us do this conceptually, and then coming into a place, a relative situation where we come in and we sit down and we practice. We're not really leaving anything, but we practice reprioritizing our consciousness, our awareness. We practice seeing. We practice receiving. And where do we start? With our own junk, because that's, as soon as you sit down and hold still, that's what you immediately see. Right? You see this, and there's that old tattered thing. And here's this rough and ready with claws and teeth coming at you. And I would say, insofar as you can't always do it. Sometimes you have to be the one who decides, I've sat here for 15 minutes, that's enough, I'm leaving. But do it out of your awareness rather than out of your right and wrong mentality. Don't justify it. I would rather see you break the law than follow the law. Do you understand me? Do you understand? You're not, of course I'm not. You're not going to go out and break some really important social or cultural convention. I'm just saying I would rather see you cut through the form so that you can see more clearly what that form is about. This is why I don't have tell people to, as was done to me and done in past times in other lineages and places where you correct people. Be very careful about correcting anyone. You don't know where they're at in their process of deepening their awareness about what form is about what the structures are about, what this whole situation is about. So observe, see them, but don't necessarily jump on some kind of a position on it. Yes?
Does practicing something ever become the actuality? Like if we practice receiving, will it become receiving?
Yeah. Eventually there's no practice, there's no Buddhism, there's no form, there isn't anything. It's called emptiness. We need to teach it, so that's what but it's not an emptiness of absence. It's full of itself. And you're here, we're all here. You've been here. Before you were born, you were here. You actually probably just came back here so you could get another dose of this staying after school and writing "I will not be crazy" on the bulletin board 15 million times. Please.
When we're practicing something like receiving or observing, it seems like we can also take the mentality of getting better. So we actually think that the relative situation is what we're trying to perfect.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
Where does the transformation occur from?
It's not a location. And if it's a location, you'll miss it because you'll keep looking for a bus stop that doesn't exist. And you'll actually, not that you waste anything, but you'll just spend more time in that particular classroom. You don't have to do that. Don't accept, don't reject, don't look away. It's as I said earlier in the talk this morning, I think I'm saying now, Buddha Dharma, without credentials, without any merit badge for any, no graduation. We use that metaphor sometimes with provisional teachings and more advanced teachings or emptiness teachings. More?
I had another question about the razor's edge.
Fine, whichever direction.
You were talking about the razor's edge for its cutting edge, and sometimes I know it's been talked about as like a balance, so like the hair's breadth deviation.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could explain what it means to like walk on the razor's edge.
Walking on the razor's edge is when there is no razor. Walking on the razor's edge, we need to say that to point to the teachings, but if you actually know what that teachings says, it will, if you actually do it, there won't be any razor, because it's not two. It looks like it's like two arrows meeting in midair. That's another metaphor for, you're not going to find out what this is. It's completely, what word can I use? I need to use a really, really strong Sanskrit word. Befuddles. There. It befuddles the ego. It does. It's just befuddling. And we can look at that and try to find, but it seems to be the effort to try to find something about it so that we can find it is the thing. It's disappointing. It's disappointing to meditate and meditate and meditate year after year after year after year and not get anywhere. You know that. It's disappointing. On the other hand, please don't give up. Keep going no matter what. What your ego thinks is getting worse is not necessarily getting worse. We don't know how your particular karma is set up so that we don't know how that's set up, and we don't know what kind of passages or labyrinths you personally may need to go through.
So is there a hair's breadth deviation?
Yeah, that's the razor's edge. If you hair's breadth deviation means you've chosen a side. You've actually gone somewhere. The threat, the razor's edge part is like, I don't want to be on a razor's edge, and that's ego, because it thinks it's something that is so real that it could be divided in half. And then it finds out it can't be cut. And it's seen to be unreal. It's the same thing with, you leap, but you fall and you fall and you fall and you never hit bottom. There isn't any bottom. There isn't any leaping either, but that will come after you enter the department store. Yes.
Junshu has a question.
Certainly.
She asks, relatively, when we are cutting something, it divides that thing into two pieces. When awareness cuts, does it divide the thing it is cutting?
I think the way I'm using it here is that the cutting part comes from looking deeply, cutting and looking in and cutting and looking in. And you know, there can be a two-ness to the situation. There's going to be, but I would just continue to look at it, and eventually you'll find something that can't be cut. This is called the Vajra-like samadhi traditionally. It's a diamond. It's the diamond cutter. It's the one that cuts, and it cuts you into smithereens. Can you cut something into smithereens, or does that mean one smither at a time? Or, I don't know.
It's befuddling.
Hmm?
It's befuddling.
It's befuddling. So the interesting thing about this is we're using metaphors, we're trying to get them to fit, and I'm getting all this help from you guys. So, you know, we go in and we try to use that, and I think the dull knife to the sharp knife is good, and the two blades, that's good. But at some point, the seeing, it just transcends any kind of metaphor. The metaphor is just like picking and choosing is the disease of the mind, or riding the razor's edge. You know, it's to ego, it's dangerous because it can destroy your integrity. It can cut you into two pieces, a million pieces.
Going back to the metaphor of cutting, you talked about sharpening the awareness.
Yes.
Like a razor. So what would be the difference between the sharpness of a razor and the sword of prajna?
So I could stretch that metaphor out a little bit and say that the razor's edge is just one cutting situation, is just that. It's more the practice oriented. It's kind of more of a path situation. Whereas the sword of prajna actually is not wielded by anyone, unless it's manjushri. But it's also, and it cuts both ways. And you might say, well, it can't do it at the same time because it does. It cuts both ways at the same time, even though you have to go. I don't know. I didn't come up with that image. So the idea of cutting there is, rather than dividing something, it has more about cutting right into something, seeing deeply down into something. That's how I would view that sort of prajna. And it's not a person. And when this starts to happen, you'll notice that you actually think without a thinker. You feel without a feeler. You smell without a smeller. Sounds silly, but it's like that. It's like there's anything that happens doesn't belong to anybody. And it's so ordinary that you can't even proclaim it. You know, I'm not going to wake up Unyo in the middle of the night and say, nobody had a dream. You know, it's not a big deal. It's just, you just notice that life is just happening without any person has any territory. I'm so intensely, especially when I was young, so intensely narcissistic and self-centered that I could never put myself in front of people like I do over and over and over again. I would be so devastated by anyone's negative thoughts about me. And astrologically, for those of you who are astrologers, I know we have 400 or 500 astrologers watching, all led by Gyokudo. The aspects show I have aspects for being extremely self-centered, even worse than a Leo. which is pretty bad. So the downside of that is, you have all this internal kind of feeling you're somehow really important, or really you can't stop thinking about yourself, about how you're doing, and are you okay, and do people like you, and it's just a very interesting area. Fear of being wrong, fear of failing, fear of looking that's the biggest one, is fear of looking like a fool. And so, as I've said, you've heard me say in other talks, once you realize you're a fool all the time, nobody can make a fool out of you, because you're already a fool. And I don't mean this figuratively speaking. This is a fool, but it's also empty of everything, empty of the self. When I say I'm empty of the self, no, I'm not. I'm pure. My ego is still just as strong as it ever was. Yes.
So sometimes you say that the anger that you had years ago hasn't gone anywhere.
Yes.
It's still here, but you just don't do anything with it. Is that not progress of sorts?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it. You can't get any credential for it. There isn't anyone to credentialize it. So you could say there's some kind of progress in that there's no more warfare. But if you look for that, if you look for a credential, then you actually turn away from the open path that you're on, which goes into emptiness, or goes into the ultimate nature, or absolute truth is going into that. You turn aside and settle for some kind of limited credentials. You might go there, and you might look back and see where it might credential mentality might work for people for a while, but not very long. It works for a little while. It helps more.
I'm just trying to get a sense of how that works. If the anger is still there, I guess how is it different from what it used to be?
Well, I don't believe it. There's no belief in it. It's there, but it's dependently arisen, so it can do whatever it wants to do. It doesn't get any fuel. You've seen me get angry a few times. So.
Oh yeah.
What do you mean, oh yeah? Maria's really cracking up. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. See, you get mad. What's different about it? Do you see anything? I mean, you want to call it progress? Do you see any progress over here? You've known me for a while. What do you see?
I see equanimity.
Equanimity?
Yeah. But
yeah.
Not a syrupy sort of thing, because I have seen your blazing anger. But it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's coming out of blame, I guess would be, or some kind of.
And I don't know what, I don't need to know. I don't know what it is. I don't need to know. I just know that, and I can say this, if you want to have one takeaway from this talk, I can tell you what it is. Be genuine. Don't try to be somebody other than who you are. If you're not justifying your anger, and suddenly you get angry, you get jealous, of saying, yes, just be that. I don't say that. I'm just saying, don't fight with anything that comes up. That's the way you're genuine. Whatever arises, anger, happiness, depression, any kind of emotional dynamic that you in the past have given a name to, stop naming it. You don't need that name to credentialize your experience. You can actually just be. You just be, with no explanation, no justification, no validation, and no apologies to anyone about anything. This doesn't mean you would say, oh, I'm sorry that I offended you. But you're doing it for them. You're not doing it because you need to be forgiven. If you need to be forgiven for something, then you should really look close at the blaming that's going on. Forgiveness is, I'm not saying there aren't times for that to happen, but you need to look really close at what that is. It establishes a subtle self-reference. The next step would be punishing murderers. It's like I've been saying to people, I don't know, off and on for a while, that rather than go off into things out in the world and try to arm wrestle the people who are aiming missiles or drone planes, or the politicians, to talk with these people who are pretty insane. Rather, train your mind so that if you do go into the world, which you will be pulled into it probably one time or another, maybe sooner than later, at least you will be sane. At least you will be working with people who have not trained their mind, and you're actually present, and you actually are responsible for your feelings, your emotions. You're no longer blaming anybody for anything. It's a very ordinary, pragmatic situation to be in. This is what blaming looks like. Yes. Questions on Zoom?
Cohesion.
Yes.
You say to be genuine, and then you also say a lot, don't add, subtract, or look away.
No.
And those things seem like they would be genuine. So how can you not add and be genuine at the same time?
Keep working at it. Just keep working at it. Everyone, you can't, it's difficult to teach, point to an ultimate understanding with a relative situation and human beings' tendency to grab onto things and reject other things and shut down on other things. We have to really bring our awareness into that, and then you'll see that for me or for you or for anyone, my area of working with that is to stop fighting with my self-consciousness. Yours might be to stop being too concerned about your jealousy, or stop being concerned about your anxiety, or stop being concerned about your depression. You're depressed, be depressed. And you might say, you probably are saying, you could say, you'll probably write me an email and say, yeah, easy for you to say. You're not the one who's depressed. But I couldn't say that to you if I hadn't had some difficulty. And perhaps I'm even still having difficulty. There's just a fundamental willingness to not object or agree or look away from anything anymore. Done doing that. That stage of your humanity is over with. And that doesn't mean that you won't have negative feelings coming up, positive feelings coming up, negative, positive, negative. It's called, in the Tibetan tradition, it's called co-emergent wisdom. Co-emergent wisdom means your craziness, your insanity, your difficulty, and your wisdom mind come up together. They emerge together. They come up together. Why? Not separate. The very thing you're trying to get rid of is not separate from your wisdom mind. It is your wisdom mind, because it's what? Not two. Perception only.
Gyokudo bowing.
Yes, Yogido.
In sharpening the sword of awareness on the cushion, I've heard it talked about as allowing you to see precisely, or there's a precision involved in this clear seeing. What does that exactly mean?
Paraphrase your question, please. Can you paraphrase it?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
What is meant by precise seeing?
Very good, thank you. Very good. Precise seeing means that you actually see everything at once. You see the negativity, you see the positivity, you see the concepts, you see the lack of concepts, you see the warfare, you see the tension, you see the relaxation. There's anything you don't see. You don't accept it, you don't disagree with it, and you don't shut down on it. It's very, very clear. And when you see it, you'll see that it's also not separate. And you'll see that it's also perception only. Just a perception. There's not a solid otherness there. There's not a solid subjectivity there. There's just this. And it just, the illusion is that there's this separated world that we're all dumped into, and we're all struggling for a position, trying to get ahead, trying to get behind, or keep from going behind. More? Do you have a further question on that?
Kyokurobai, is this the same as realization?
Is what the same as realization?
Seeing precisely, seeing with precision.
I think it's close. Fundamental realization, we wouldn't see much. So there's still a path quality to it. There's still that working with it that way. Once one has is to use that word, once one is realized, or you realize that you're not separate from anything, and there isn't anything to do, because you're no longer at war with anything, and so then anything that happens is not separate. So then you could get mad, you could get sad, you could get anxious, you could anything could happen, and you could also just function with everything and there'd be a sense of I'm not talking about some kind of silly kind of airy-fairy happiness that you're running around with rainbows coming out of your ears, but I'm saying it's just a fundamental, Trungpa Rinpoche used the word basic goodness. Everything's basically good. Even in the midst of really difficult confusion, you can't get rid of the confusion. You can't fight with the confusion, because that's more warfare. You just include it. Not easy when of course there's been century after century of building up to this kind of terrible world scene right now, where a small percentage of human beings are totally insane and quite a few of them are in charge. And then there's lots of people who are just trying to feed their kids.
Maria bowing.
Yes, Maria.
You said during the morning talk, don't land on anything, fall apart. Does it apply to the perception during the practice on the cushion?
Yes, you may work with it there. Meditation, post-meditation, at some point in your activity, non-activity as a meditator, at some point the boundary or the line between meditation practice and post-meditation, getting up off the cushion, living your life, at some point that boundary just disappears. That doesn't mean you're walking around in a trance, and it doesn't mean you're doing cartwheels on your cushion. It just means that the boundary between those two is just not there anymore. So the contrast between sitting for 2 or 3 hours even looking at the wall, or going out into the kitchen, or going out and making some preparing food, or doing laundry, or something just mundane, or going to a movie, or going to dinner with friends, or sitting on the cushion. It's just they're not different from each other. Our preconceptions about what that would be like tend to get in the way of what it's actually like.
Maria bowing. So during the practice of meditation, if I land on something, it means this is like the first step to develop concept. What comes to me is that sometimes I'm observing the texture.
Yes.
And out of observing the texture of something, I see the process of thinking about this. And is this the landing, this is what you are calling the landing?
That's what I'm calling awareness. So what you're seeing as a landing, I'm seeing as awareness. So the way, when I say don't land on anything, I'm not saying don't land on anything. I'm saying don't land on anything. Isn't that clear? I'm not saying don't land on anything. I'm saying don't land on anything. I don't know how else to say it than that. And when that happens, you'll see that there's a landing and a not landing. The landing is the physical kind of landing or phenomenological situation, ontological, if you want to use the fancy word, situation. Something is there. But then the awareness doesn't do anything. And it looks like it's dividing when actually it's not two, perception only. Then it collapses into itself, to use a relative kind of metaphor. That's why you can be genuine. That's why in the Tibetan tradition, they call it the crazy wisdom form of the Buddhas of the three times. Dorje Trollo, Karapakshi. And just using two great teachers of the past who understood this and taught it. And it's crazy because when ego looks at it, this is nuts. Ego looks at that, it looks crazy. Or when ego or self-centered mind looks at someone functioning in this way who is totally genuine, it wants to blame or find fault. Or they did it with my teacher, both of my teachers they did. More so with Trungpa Rinpoche, who was more ostentatious and outrageous. But what a teacher. His students are all over the place. Most of them are invisible because they're living. They're just living. They're fulfilling their karma, you could say. And how do I know that? I don't know. I'm kind of shocked that I'm sitting here.
Gary Bowling.
Yes, Gary.
I've been thinking about the idea of gaining, and there's a sense every time I sit down and meditate that I'm getting somewhere.
Yes.
Even though I know there's nowhere to get. It's like sitting on a treadmill. Every time I sit down, there's nowhere to get except right there. But there's a sense that you want to get somewhere.
Yes.
Well, how can we work with that? It's sort of aggravating, actually.
You're doing it. That's how it feels. It's aggravating. That's right up my alley. Aggravating. Sit, aggravating. Sitting with aggravation. There's a talk title. Aggravated sitting. So do it anyway. And the great thing about it is you're doing it, but think it would be, without a teaching, without a teacher, without a sangha, without a form, without a structure, it'd be really difficult to keep going. It would be difficult, really. And if you have any, quite often people, I've noticed, not several, but a few people who have been students of mine, as soon as they run into it's like everybody, not everybody, but some people are looking for a way out. And if they find something strong enough, oh my goodness, finally I can get out of here. They're not saying that because they actually think they found something wrong with something. So they go another direction. I say there's no way you can know what this is. We can't really know what this is. You know what it does? It gets bright in the daytime and dark at night. Everything else is extra. So the downside of what you're saying is, I feel this, I understand what it's like to do this and feel agitated and aggravated, and it's just irritating to sit and with the self-centered mind to keep looking for some kind of result, some kind of progress on the path. And there are a lot of teachers that are willing to give you all kinds of things that show progress on the path. I prefer not to do that. I didn't get any of it. My teachers, neither one of my teachers spoon-fed me anything. Or, it'll be okay. The most I got was a little bit of encouragement. Not a lot, but it was enough. And I would say, just keep going. Hi, Fleta.
There seems to be, I guess, as you need more insight.
See what?
She just heard you. I think she said.
Go ahead, Gary.
Sorry, thank you. The idea of getting somewhere, I guess, as you sit down, is the gaining insight into yourself, the gaining portion, as you look and look and look and see how you're crazy. I don't know if that's identified as gaining, but it's more of an understanding of yourself, I guess, is a way to determine it. Is that, I guess, is that gaining as you meditate?
No, I think it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like you're fixating on that. It sounds like it's just a feeling of changes and a feeling of contrast going on. So the idea is just to keep going. It will nothing lasts. So as you watch, anything you watch, if it lasts, you're probably fiddling with it. I mean, you're pushing it, pulling it, or looking away. But if it just starts to fade off, like a credential will come up and you don't do anything with it, just look at the credential and then it'll go away. And the next day you'll feel like crap again. Welcome to my world. When I say that, it's your world. I'm just welcome to our world. This is our world. We have to, if we don't do this, the only other options we have is to go to war with everything or be confused or believe in a bunch of people's opinions about things. I'm doing the best I can to teach as free of opinions as I can and to empower, if you want to say it that way, empower all of you to realize what this is for yourself. It may not look like it does for me. All I know is I'm completely confident about this because it's coming out of a place there's no reference points there. I feel very, very good when I reflect on this, and I feel how lucky we all are to meet at this, especially closing down this part of my life. It's where it's coming to an end. I'm old. You guys are young, but I'm just saying I feel very lucky to be given the opportunity to talk to a few people about this because it's so important. And it's not easy to find this. There are places where Buddhism and meditation, everything, they're not doing. They're not wrong. They're just a different level. This is what you're hearing now is the ultimate. I'm not bragging about it. I'm teaching higher teaching than anybody. I'm just saying I'm pointing at what it is you need to realize. If you need to realize this, Buddhism is kind of. It's just a form. It's just a pretty good form. Real good one. It's a way to communicate this kind of understanding to others using forms that don't necessarily interfere with our confusion or with our path or with what we may have to go through. Further questions? Any questions here in the Zendo?
Maria Bowing.
Yes.
You said this morning that the intent of the of Sangha is to be truthful. What does it mean to be truthful, Bowing?
So insofar as we can, to not look away from anything that arises, insofar as we can, and don't necessarily go into something with ideas about it. Actually receive things the way they are in their pristine nature. So we never really know what's coming towards us. If we have a realization about it, then we know that it's that we're really not separate from it, no matter how weird or foreign it looks. So sometimes things look like they're not true. You should really look, if you're into not true or true, either one of those, you really need to look closely at it. That may be not such a satisfactory response, but that's what came up. Kozan's yawning, so I have to crank it up a little bit, keep everybody awake.
Gyokuroba,
Yes.
could you explain again what co-emergent wisdom means?
You can. So co-emergent, saying co-emergent, there's another name for that, a Tibetan name, and I can't recall what it is, but it's co-emergent. So it's the craziness, the confusion, the dismay, the distress, the anxiety, and all of that, and your wisdom, your complete clarity come up together. Co-emergent. They co-emerge. They come out of you, or they come toward you. It emerges. And you see, not two. The subject and the object have collapsed into each other. All of the polarities have collapsed. And everything is at rest. Even in the middle of very, very extreme difficulty where you can look at what's happening in the world and get really upset about whatever. Those things are part of that. This doesn't necessarily make you or anybody else, me or anyone else, a pacifist. I don't have any position like don't go to war, or don't. I might say, don't go to war, but I also know that you can't help but go to war. The very nature of ego or self-centeredness is some kind of war, either your own little internal war, or the war that you finally put out on the world. You go to war with the world, and then depending on your karma, you might even get other people to join you and go. That's the whole thing around nationality. It works for a while until it starts to blow up and people start to take over the situation who are, what do they call them? There's an O. Oligarchs. Oligarchs, is that it? So co-emergent. So we're no longer trying to separate the difficulty and just get the good stuff. We're actually, there's a willingness to just allow things to be what they are. It's like this little motto on the banner here. It says, as it is. Just as it is. Whatever it is. I can't last, or whatever is rising. It doesn't mean that if you go with this as it is, just as it is, it doesn't mean you're validating this. It doesn't mean that you're somehow, well, that's not really the truth there. That's, why would I say as it is to that? Because that's not feeling so good. Or I feel terrible. I can't even say as it is. I could say, you'd have to change my name from as it is mountain to as it will be mountain. As it will be later on mountain.
If there is co-emergent wisdom, is this precise seeing?
You could say that. You could say that it's just very clear. It's clear about everything. it's clear that everything, the positive, negative, neutral, none of that is separate. You can't have positive without negative. That's the philosophical, conceptual part of it. To realize that is to actually go beyond it and not even know about those, not really hang on to those terms. You're not validating anything. You're actually living in the reality that you once studied, that you once read in the books, or you once studied and you once thought about and reflected on. You're living in it. And then you may meditate, you may continue to meditate, you may not. You may continue to sit down in front of a wall maybe the rest of your life. You may just do it because that's what you do. Or you may not. Yes.
So would co-emergent wisdom, could it also be described as dependently arisen?
The way it's talked about, the way it's being said there, co-emergent, that there's a dependent quality to it. But once we see what has been pointed at, then the dependency is gone. Because it's not separate. There isn't anything for it to be dependent on. But we won't, let's say it this way, we won't see it unless we stop this internecine warfare in our emotions, our ideas, and our hopes and dreams and wishes, back and forth, trying to get somewhere. Virtual materialism. There needs to be just a fundamental seeing. You could call it surrender, maybe. I don't care to use that word too much. You could see it just, be here and watch the positive, watch the negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, and you don't jump ship. And don't abandon it or go somewhere else or stop looking or head for the Oreos. Those are mountains, the Oreo mountains, aren't they? And so, I think each person may, because of whoever's listening to this, because of your particular karma, your causes and conditions, the way your setup is as far as being born and all the things that you've had to deal with in your life, whatever you're dealing with right now, including when you sit in front of the cushion like Gary was talking about, you just, aggravated by it or just irritated by the whole thing. That's your Dharma. That's your Dharma gate. Whatever's showing up in your mind is your Dharma gate. Please, just don't accept it, don't reject it, don't look away. Those are the 3 poisons. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask of anybody. Don't accept what's happening to you. Don't reject what's happening to you, and don't shut down on it. Where does that put you? Right here. And it's a practice. So you practice it, you practice it, you practice it, until you find that if you're just right here, there isn't anyone. It's only when there's someone who doesn't like it, someone who likes it, and someone who is oblivious to it, that there's someone who's having all that. But when you turn off the gas to all of those, so you need that kind of pushing and pulling and relative spinning around in order to maintain a feeling of there is someone. So when that starts to slow down, then the consciousness might be concerned. The 7th consciousness starts to be worried that, maybe it needs protecting. So we bring along concepts and ideas and judgments, or we might even change our direction. Well, I don't like, I don't like the way they do this at that sangha or this. I don't care for that teacher anymore because he, she, they started doing this or did that. We all see it. Those of you who are here, they can see that, and it might be a dramatic thing that happened. It might be just we just don't hear from that person anymore. That doesn't mean they're wrong, but that could mean that they just wasn't their time to sit down and, like Gary's doing, sit down. No compliment for you, Gary, by the way, but like Gary's doing, just sit down every morning and look at the wall. It seems necessary to do that in order to see what is happening. See co-emergence, see so that you understand what that is, so you can come and tell me what that is. or someone else possibly who might need some help. Any further questions there from anyone here in the Zendo? Any questions? You guys all look very knowledgeable. Let's see, Kozan, any questions?
Kozan, yeah.
Okay.
You said, you say don't accept, don't reject, don't look away. And off the cushion, we're in the middle of our lives and there's something that's leading us, or we're just lost in something. How can we even do that on purpose?
I think we can't, but realizing that you can't is how it's done. You can't do that. You can't help but grasp. You can't help but reject. You can't help but shut down. Continue to do it anyway. And we have to kind of I don't know if you call it sneak up on it, but we have to just keep working with it. We don't give up, because it's so easy to just say, oh, I'm going to just bail. I'm going to join a bridge club. The hell with this meditation stuff. It's especially difficult with our culture, because we don't have anybody around our culture telling us what we're doing here is valuable, or we don't have we have to even kind of explain to our mother, father, sister, brother, spouse, kids, the society, we're doing this, and we think this is valuable. But why would you want to do that? Turn into a vegetable. That's why we have asparagus house, vegetables. So it's just a matter of continuing. And this is why Sangha is valuable, because you'll see the interacting with other people and be able to talk to them about it. And I'm not saying you say everything about your practice. It's good to keep some of that to yourself, maybe most of it. But to see that other people are going through similar things that maybe that you're going through on maybe a different level, a different place, seems to be helpful to see that. It certainly has been for me. Sangha has been, in some ways, maybe even more important. Once you have the teacher, then you really need to look to the Sangha, because the teacher won't be here for a long time, forever. But the Sangha will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for joining us for our first ever virtual retreat. We're going to stand and dedicate the merit, and I also want to continue to invite feedback, so we'd like to continue to do this in the future. We had a really great turnout today, so any feedback you have would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jimo Sanchi Shihu Shizon Musamo Kosa the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.